everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea, I'm a librarian, and we are joined here today by my really good friend Jen. Jen is an archivist, and I thought it would be kind of fun to do kind of like a do you want to be an archivist kind of video to complement the so you want to be a librarian video, where we're going to ask Jen a lot of questions about the archive field and what it's like. So let's start off like super basic. What is an archivist? What does an archivist even do?
So an archivist processes, arranges, and describes unpublished materials and then we catalog records of enduring value, so things that we think are going to be valuable down the road. So for example, you know at the library you get books in, they go out of the library when they're not in circulation anymore, you take them out. Archive always keeps everything. We try to keep 1 to 2 copies of material because we want to preserve that information for future generations. We take a lot of personal donations like diaries, correspondence, photographs, negatives, glass negatives. So we're taking, and also a lot of archives have objects. I remember one time I went for a tour of an archive and they had a vest made of human hair. So archives keep a variety of things. So an archive is not a museum, but we're an extension of a museum because it's things you can kind of access.
Yeah. So if a person just comes and drops a box full of stuff on your desk, how do you make the decision of what stays and what goes?
So each archive, and I've worked at several archives, has a mandate that they follow. So depending on the archive's mandate, if the items fall under the mandate, then we would keep them. So for example, if you're working at like a private, like let's say it's a county archive or a municipal archive, you would keep records related to that county or that municipality. And then from there you say, do we already have a copy of this? How good is the condition? How good is the condition of the record we already have? Will this complement that record? Is it better? Is it missing something? For example, sometimes you get photographs, especially school photographs. Sometimes they're labeled, sometimes they're not labeled. So if the one's labeled, I'm going to keep, and we have one that's unlabeled and there's one that's labeled that came in, I'm going to keep the one that's labeled as well as the one we already have, so then it kind of gives some context to that record.
Okay.
So sometimes if you get records in, they'll complement other records. And then we can also, you organize them and say, hey, you know what, maybe this record's going to go with the school board fond. And a fond is like a high-level record series collection, which we'll talk about later.
Okay, and then you mentioned earlier when we were talking about archives, you said that if a person comes in and they've already organized it.
Oh, so sometimes some people will bring in a box of material and it has no sense of organization to it. So it's up to the archivist to kind of go through the material and decide, is there organization to this record or is there not? Because there is a principle called principle of original order. So that basically means, do we want to keep the records in the way they came in and they were organized? Because sometimes people will be clearing out their desk drawer and there will be a pile of records, and like let's say they have them nicely folded and they're labeled. So the way that the person has organized them and labeled them kind of says something about the person and how the collection's organized and maybe how they, person organized things. I've worked at archives where they have like personal papers of a famous author, something like that. And like they'll keep them in the same order because maybe that's something about how the author's brain works or and like how they've organized the records. So that's, I'd keep it in that order if someone came in and you can tell there was a clear definition of order. Sometimes people will just say, okay, here's a bunch of stuff I like cleaned out of my house. Do you want this? And we'll maybe say yes. Sometimes we'll keep everything. Sometimes we won't keep anything. Sometimes we'll keep select things. Just thinking back to, do we have a copy of this? Does it fit in our mandate?
So so for example, like let's say you're in an archive and the archive is World War I.
Yeah.
And then this person comes and then they have archives from like, that would be more of the city's history.
Yeah.
Would you then like call up the other archivists from another museum or another archive and tell them we
transfer it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so for example, depending on where I got, like how the material came in, sometimes too, if the donors are really prolific donor and they've donated a lot of things to our museum, we may take it because that's something they've donated and maybe it's a personal paper from them. Sometimes it depends on what it is. So we may just take it even though it's not directly related. But if I was working at an archive and something did not fit in our mandate, I would contact another archive, or I'd say to the donor, hey, this might fit better here, and then it might be up to the donor to transfer the material. I would only take the record if we were keeping it, and if I said to them, it might fit somewhere else, that would be up to them to contact them, because they'd have to know the donor, because it would kind of be difficult for me to take something and transfer it somewhere else because you don't know who technically owns the material.
Is there money involved? Like I know, for example, in rare book libraries, if people want to donate us stuff, we have to get them appraised, and then they can donate them only once we've appraised them somewhere, and then it has to be a certain sum. Do archives get appraised?
So archives do records appraisals. So if it's under $1,000, this is like depending on where you work. Some archives will give a tax, or most archives will give you a tax receipt. If the record's under $1,000, the archivists at the archive will just kind of say, hey, we think it's worth this much. If it's over, then they may have an appraiser come in. A couple archives I worked at did have appraisers come in, and they would just do everything at the end of the year. They'd pull everything out that people said they wanted a tax receipt for. And then we would just go through each record and say, hey, it's worth this much, this much, this much, and then we'd assign them tax receipts. But every archive is different. It may be a case-by-case basis. So people might do it when the records come in. They might do it at the end of the year with everything else, depending on how big the collection is, who it's coming from, and if there's any notable donors or people's papers in there.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess what I was trying to get at is, do patrons ever have to pay you directly? Is there ever an interaction?
Oh, will we take money from a patron?
From people, yeah. Or is there an exchange? Can people sell you things?
So I don't think we necessarily, depending on which archive you work at, maybe private archives would, especially if it's more of a niche archive, they may pay for records because they may not be able to get their hands on them otherwise. I've mostly worked at municipal offices or county archives, so in that case we would not pay for the records unless we it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. We don't normally purchase records because we just expect people to donate things to us. Also too, we're getting records from member municipalities and the county itself, so that kind of makes up our collection.
Okay, and I guess what I'm trying to figure out here is for a person who's never heard of an archivist or has heard of it, but they don't really know what the differences are between library work and an archivist. What's the path to becoming an archivist? Do you go to school? Do you go to college, university?
So for me personally, I have a 4-year degree from York University. That was my undergrad, was in history and humanities. And then I did a master's degree in archives and records management and library information science at the University of Toronto iSchool. I know Western also offers a program too. There's also Archives Technicians program, and I think that was at Mohawk College.
Yeah.
And they offer one there. But I think when we were talking earlier, I mentioned, if I was applying to a job and someone else with an Archive Technicians degree was applying to a job, and they may look at the person with the master's degree, because a lot of job descriptions do say we want a 4-year degree in history. But after working in the field and talking to my bosses and fellow archivists, a lot of people say they look for that 4-year degree because they want that training, because it kind of gives you a heads up on what to expect when working in an archive. And I think the technician's degree is also great, but we live in a world where more education is probably better for this role.
So if someone was thinking right now, oh, I might want to be an archivist or a librarian, are there more skills or more qualities a person would have that would make them lean more towards one than the other? Do you have to be better at organizing things, or better with people? What are the kind of skills or...
Well, I know probably working in your field, you work with patrons a lot, you're really in the public eye. And depending on which archive you work at and what your role is, you may not talk to the public a lot. I know at my previous position, we were constantly interacting with the public, taking donations, helping them with research. In my current role, I'm in charge of cataloging and digitization. So I normally don't interact with the public. I'm kind of in the back, just organizing and describing material. So I would say my job, you need to be if when it's time to assist people, you need to be friendly and be able to assist them and things like that. But I also think too, this field is kind of growing, and there's a role, a lot of people expect things to be digitized, so I think you need to be a little tech savvy. It's really good to have a leg up on how to use scanners, how to use Photoshop, all these other skills that they don't teach in school. Kind of learn these things. Also being very detail oriented, I think, is important, because sometimes you may be able to point something out in a record that's be important, and you add that to your description. I also think that being able to organize and kind of be able to like take multiple projects at one time, because sometimes I'm not just working on one project, I'm working on multiple things, because sometimes I need to break up my day. It's very monotonous working on one collection. Right now I'm working on a collection of 25 boxes of historic military material, and I'm kind of on box like 4 and 5, and I've been stuck there for a while because there's so much stuff in that box.
So when you decide to discard some stuff, like you don't need it, is it just like a free-for-all, like you just get rid of it? Do you shred it? Do you trash it? Do you give it back?
So there's kind of a couple things there. So is something in the collection and I'm getting rid of it, or someone brought something in and I don't want it?
Someone brought something in.
Oh, so I would just return it to the donor unless they tell me I don't want anything back. Then I would double check with them before I get rid of it. Usually I'd pass it on to another institution, ask them if they want it. Like my last resort is throwing it out or burning it or something. Unless it's like a photograph that I make, say, hey, no one wants this, and then just shred it, because, you know, especially if it's a newer photograph, because of copyright, you don't want things out there. Because I think, is it in 1948, I think? Anything prior to 1948 is in the public domain. Or maybe it's in 1949 now. I don't know, the years probably have moved, but.
So, and then if it's in the collections, do you guys weed stuff out too, like we do?
So I guess you're talking about taking it out of circulation, right? So we have a process called deaccessioning. Deaccessioning is when we go through the collection and say, hey, you know what, maybe this record doesn't fit in with our mandate. Maybe it came in 1973 when the archive just opened, and a lot of archives at their beginning would just take anything and everything related to, like, you know, anything. Like, people would just take anything. Maybe it was like, you know, a picture of the Queen. Like, how many pictures of the Queen does one person need in their collection, right? Sometimes we would say, hey, you know what, this doesn't fit in our collection, and then we'd list it for deaccessioning. But then sometimes you have a process there where, like, you might need to go through county council if you work at a municipal archive, or you may need to have your board you report to, and you'd have to collect all your records and say, hey, these are what we want to deaccession. It's a really difficult process. Most archives have a wish list of deaccessions, but they kind of never get there because it's just a lot of work to deaccession things.
So do you also work in collaboration with preservation and conservation? So
some archives do have a conservator on staff. The archive I work at now does not, but there's 4 archivists working there. One of them is in charge of conservation, and so she has a lot of skills. She's not a conservator by trade, but she's taken a lot of classes and she's done a lot of hands-on work with our collection. So her specialty is working on that. I kind of work in tandem with the conservator, and we were working on unrolling some photographs. Like, you know, when you get a really long panoramic photograph, it always rolls itself up, or people store them that way because, you know, you don't really have a spot for them. A lot of people don't have them framed. Most of the time they're school photographs or like a family reunion, things like that. So then we would put weights on them, or you can kind of release the tension with steam or humidity. So you you can make a little box and put the photograph in that and like slowly add humidity, and it would kind of just relax itself. And then we make an enclosure for it.
Ooh, that's pretty cool. Wait, you said something earlier about mold.
Oh yeah, so when we were chatting earlier, I mentioned some records do come in, and some people have things sitting in their basement or sitting in their garage. Some records do come in extremely moldy, and so we would put them in. We have a quarantine contamination room. Right now, because of COVID, we would quarantine records in there after people have used them or when people bring them in, like new donations. One of the archivists I was talking to was going through the collection, and she found some minutes from a township that had become extremely moldy. So she put them in the quarantine room, and right now they're sitting there and waiting to be processed so the mold can be removed. Sometimes if the mold is inactive, it's okay, and we'll just wrap it in paper and put it on the shelf. But if the mold is active, it could easily spread to other things, especially if it's not wrapped.
From your studies, because you took LIS and archives.
Yeah.
In the actual courses, what were kind of the differences between what you would study in archives versus librarian? Because I remember you guys had more exams where you had to like memorize things.
So I would say that I remember taking the intro to reference class. And there it was kind of like, okay, you know, we had to make a bibliography.
That's where we met!
Yeah, that's where our class we met in. So I remember we had to make a bibliography, and we would, you know, you're kind of laying out, okay, like these are the records, like these are the things you'd look at. Whereas in archives classes, we're kind of learning more theory, like, you know, how would you treat records, like the original order theory, things like that, like the rules for archival description, also known as RAD. So we talk about things like that. The problem was at such a high, like our program was only 2 years, and you know, you only took like 1 or 2 classes where they discussed RAD, or like sometimes they just mention it. And I also took records management classes where we didn't talk about RAD. I talked about, you know, how to like manage things and using different software.
I'm gonna link some stuff down below just so that there's more information. What would you say? Okay, so I talked about this in previous videos on librarian work, where I would say kind of like the highs and lows of being a librarian, and most of it is kind of just dealing with the public, because you have some people just coming in and doing random stuff in the library, or like just really embarrassing things. Like, what are kind of your peak moments of like, I can't?
Okay, so archives are different because we have a small reading room, and that's usually supervised by an archivist at all times. I'm assuming people that are coming in are there to do research on a more professional level than, you know, someone just coming into the library to just use the computer. Most of the time you have to sign in or you pay a registration fee before you come in, so we have all your information. But I guess it's kind of like a library card in a way, because you can't swipe it on the way in or anything like that. But we know who you are and we know why you're there. And most of the time you're coming in to look at certain records. Also, archives have much shorter hours than libraries, so I'm assuming people are there, they're going to utilize their time. So we do have someone supervising the reading room, so we're not going to have people watching inappropriate things on the computer, I hope. You know, when someone needs a lot of assistance on the computer, or you get people that come in and they're not sure how to use an archive, I think sometimes that's frustrating for them. And so I try to walk them through the process of how our materials are organized. So I think sometimes it's, making sure our material is easily accessible to everybody, making sure we have an online catalog so people can access our information. So just kind of making it accessible for the public and higher level researchers, I think, is important. I'm trying to think what else. Like you said, highs and lows, right?
Like, is there something that you just find I wish I would... I think I want to frame this as what would you wish you would have known before you went into this field?
Oh, gotcha. The pay?
Is it really good?
No.
No.
You don't go... Someone told me one time as an archivist said, you don't go into this job for the pay. That's true depending on where you work. I think you really need to have a love of records and organizing that kind of stuff, and understanding records of enduring value, seeing their value in a long-term goal. Because earlier you asked me, do we deaccession things? Honestly, no, because archives would always keep most things, always, unless it doesn't fit in our collection mandate.
Just get everything.
Just get everything.
Things in the field that you wish you would have known about before going in, or things that took you by surprise.
I think honestly when I was in school, they talked about RAD. A lot of archives usually use RAD. No, Archives of Ontario definitely uses it. Some archives I've worked at don't use RAD, or they'll use a version of it, or a lot of people just take it and morph it. I think one of the things that I wish I knew was every archive is different. Not every archive operates the same. Honestly, I obviously knew that a little bit at volunteering and working at different archives before getting a full-time job in the field. But it's just different to see how other archives, interact and intermingle together. When you when you go to different work sites, you're talking to different people, or you're talking to different archivists. It's interesting to see how things run, because a lot of archives started as a volunteer project. And like I said, people would just take anything and everything, and they would just start cataloging it, or arranging and describing it in a certain way. And then now we have to keep up the way they've been doing it. And I'm not going to go back and start, because the archive I work at now...
Oh my god, we had to re-catalog our library from the beginning.
No!
Because they cataloged it wrong, so we had to start all over again from every single record.
Yeah, so we would I would not recommend that. Sometimes we do a shelf read where we'll check if all the material's there, and then we'll put box labels on it. The archive I work at now started in 1972. I think it's Ontario's second oldest municipal archive or something like that.
Wait, so are all archives funded by the government?
No. So some archives are private and they have no funding at all. Some are volunteer. A lot of archives are volunteer run. Like I said, they've been started by volunteers, and some of them continue to be volunteer run. And they may not get any funding, or they may get minimal funding. You can also apply for grants. Thankfully, some of the archives I've worked at are funded by the municipal government, or a region or a county or something like that. And then they would also apply for municipal funding on top of that, especially for summer students. The Young Canada Works always hires a lot of archivists and librarians and people in the museum field.
Is it easier to find an archivist job than a librarian job?
I honestly don't know, because I've not looked for a library job, so I'm not sure how to compare that. I did find it's very difficult to get a full-time job in the field, and I feel like there's a lot of contract positions right now. It's very difficult because, we don't have... And, a lot of people stay in their jobs. Once they find a job, they'll stay there because it's really good and you learn the collection. Yep. And, archivists themselves are kind of an invaluable asset because they know a lot of the collection. And sometimes if you don't have a database, or you don't... only some people know to do certain things, and they're really invaluable.
Yeah, no. In libraries, people never retire.
I always joke that, you know, you're gonna have to die at your desk before you get promoted.
I know. It's been so difficult. Like, all the young librarians are honestly still doing volunteer
All the
jobs.
young hot librarians aren't getting hired. It's all these old ladies.
Even people who are on the older side, is like they've worked really hard to get
course.
there, and they had to wait for a really long time, and it's like they finally got their turn, and now they're like doing it.
And I also feel like schooling has changed. Like, talking to another archivist at my work, she just has like a college diploma, but it's not even in a related field, and she just started working there. And then from there, she kind of gained other skills on the way. So now, like, she has a lot of knowledge, and like I look to her for guidance because she really knows that archive, and she's worked there for over 20 years.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say before we go? We just restored a gnome. Can I tell them that? Yeah, we found the gnome and we restored it and painted it, and now we just want to go to the cemetery for a walk. Anything else you want to add about?
I would say reach out, ask questions. If you're really interested in being an archivist, I think it's always interesting. Like, make sure you volunteer lots of archives. That really gets your foot in the door. Look for summer positions through Young Canada Works. You know, ask questions. Email
wait,
archivists.
hold on. Sorry, one last question. Because you just said Canada. For LIS, because we are accredited by the American Library Association, it's very similar in the United States. Are archivists also the same in the United States and Canada?
So for here, there is an archivist course, I think, archivist certification through the Society of American Archivists you have to take to work in the States. You don't have to take it to work in the States, I don't think, but it's like, you know, really, it's one up. In Canada, we don't have that. You kind of just do some training. I've talked to other archivists before, and one of them just took a class through, like, you know, the government of Ontario, but he's just retired. And so, you know, you can really see how the fields change, because now you want that master's degree where they just took somebody who just took a class to be an archivist through, like, you know, in college. So
Would you call that deprofessionalization?
I would guess so.
No, because I always wondered if in the States, like, if you guys are as tight in the archivist
I always
field.
find there's a lot more jobs in the States, but I'm not willing to move in the middle of a pandemic for a job, so.
Well, it's really hard to tell, because, like, sometimes I look at library jobs in Toronto or something. It looks like there's a lot.
Yeah.
And then when you actually go and apply, it's like they don't exist. It's like, where are they?
Or, you know, so they've already had someone in mind for the job, and then they're just like, we're just posting it as a formality.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope this interview has helped at least one person out there, and especially if you're considering the bookish field, but you feel like librarianship might not be for you, or that you don't really like interacting with the public as much. This might be another path for you. So I'm hoping that this would be useful, or at least a starting point. And I'm going to link down below a bunch of stuff, and Jen's going to give me some more things to link down below. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!